My life has been filled with the joy of friendship. This is the story of 7 friends who have been an important part of my life from school days until now. My name is Wendy. I was born in England, where my mother went before the war from Barbados, where she was born and raised. It had been my great-grandfather who had gone from England in the 1800s to Barbados as a missionary priest to St. John's Church. There he met and married my great-grandmother. My grandmother was the second of their 4 children. She also married a priest. They had 4 children, the oldest of whom was my mother. My mother went to England in the late 1930s after high school. In 1939, World War II broke out and she was unable to return to Barbados. She met my father and they were married before he went to Africa with the British Army. I was born in 1941 and my sister in 1943. When my father left for Africa, my mother felt abandoned, as were many war brides away from home, in the midst of a horrific and terrifying war, with 2 babies 18 months apart, literally running with us from one air raid shelter to another to escape the bombs in London, and eventually even further beyond to Oxford and Devon. My mother told me afterwards that during those years she was quite desperate. She would be lonely, homesick, sad, sometimes angry at my father. She felt deserted. Since my sister was only a tiny baby, she used to take it out on me. She told me it was me that she knocked about, hence our placement in the orphanage. So sensing her desperate condition in caring for us, I became the little mother from a very early age and stated from the age of 4 that I wanted to be a nurse when I grew up. In 1946, after the war ended, my father returned and we sailed as a family on a cargo boat across the Atlantic to Barbados. I was 4 and my sister was 2. The next 2 years would be my only time in a traditional family life until I was married and had my own family. Then my father left our home, our family, and the island of Barbados. He returned to England with another woman. Wars can have such devastating consequences. My parents divorced. It was 2 years after arriving in Barbados. I was 6 and my sister was 4. My shattered little mother was left to face the music on a small island coming from a well-respected Christian family. On looking back, I realized how difficult and humiliating it must have been for her. She had to go out to work. She struggled emotionally and financially, but fortunately, we had a loving, kind, and supportive extended family. At my school, Queen's College, I met 2 girls, Anne, and another, Christine. It was at this early age that I first learned the real meaning of friendship, as they became my friends. They all lived in lovely, proper homes. We just moved from one rented apartment to another. They had a mother and a father who drove cars, and it seemed to us had plenty of money and perfect and happy lives. Their homes and family structures became a refuge for me. I loved to go for sleepovers with them, to stay at their cottages at the beach, or sailing in their yachts. Just being in a family with a father and a mother who baked and sewed and did all those motherly things. Later, my mother owned and ran a small lunchtime restaurant, the Flying Fish Club, in Bridgetown, the island's capital. She was a wonderful hostess, known for her knowledge. Her clientele were the local town crowd, tourists, and yachtsmen who had sailed often across the Atlantic and landed on the island of Barbados. Memories of my childhood in Barbados remain happy ones. Still, to be a nurse remained my goal, saving every penny for my airfare. Feeling the stigma of my past, I had decided that I would leave Barbados when I became 16. But I needed to be 18 to start nursing. So, a 2-year diploma training in nursery nursing would fill the gap. That was when I met Jill. We were complete opposites. Jill, confident, always smiling and happy, and me, shy, introverted, definitely plain, large horn-rimmed glasses, homesick, and always cold. We just clicked. Jill taught me so much. Above all, she instilled confidence in me. Over the next 2 years, Jill and her family became my second home and family. Life moved on. I had lost touch with Anne, and Christine. Then we were 18. Jill and I graduated and went on our separate journeys. We lost touch. Another goodbye, another new beginning. I started 3-year registered nursing training in London. There I befriended 2 nursing students, Pauline and Judy. Pauline, somewhat scattered, prone to getting into scrapes and lots of fun, and Judy, a stunning, lanky blonde who always seemed to land with her bum in the butter no matter what. Once again, both complete opposites to me. It was hilarious. We were students. We never had enough money. Life was tough. But for me, London was still, most often, cold and wet. But I had my friends. In those 3 years, we matured. First-time nursing experiences, births and deaths, sadness and joy, travels and adventures, not to mention our own escapades, romances and heartaches. We shared a flat, wore each other's clothes, confided in one another's secrets. We laughed and cried, celebrated and holidayed together. We had our fights and our fun. Then 3 years were up and we graduated as registered nurses. But Pauline and I had had enough of working shifts and night duty when everyone else was not, and we decided to leave nursing. Was the conscientious Queen's College schoolgirl, the little mother, rebelling, needing to be free of responsibility? Pauline and I moved to a new flat and worked at various jobs. First in a big department store, me selling cosmetics about which I knew absolutely nothing. To this day, I don't even wear lipstick. Pauline sold toys. Anything to pay the rent while seeking freedom and fun. Then, to earn a regular wage, we joined a shelter for homeless street women. But the scene there was utterly heartbreaking. And needless to say, we didn't stay there very long. By now, Pauline and I had moved again. We were living in a 5-story house in the slums of London, each flat inhabited by graduates from the hospital where we had trained. Pauline and I lived in the basement. It was a real underground hole, no hot water, with an outside toilet. The other 4 flats shared an indoor loo. It was a riot, but after a while, Pauline and I got restless. We needed to break the monotony of our routine. We needed to travel. One of our most memorable adventures was the night we hitchhiked from Athens to Delphi with our huge suitcases, no wheels of course, wearing shorts, in a fish van driven by a big fat Greek, no English, and stinking of raw fish. Me in the middle, sandwiched between him and Pauline. Crazy, risky, completely irresponsible. So unlike me. We wound our way up the mountains in the dead of night, not a spoken word, swirling around each bend at great speed until we reached the top. Suddenly, the driver jammed on his brakes, stopped, there was a taverna. Smoke, loud pounding Greek music, and the sound of drunken merriment bellowed into the night. Big fat Greek got out, slammed the door and disappeared. Pauline and I sat shivering with fear, imagining all the possibilities of our upcoming fate. After about an hour, we had already envisaged ourselves molested, dead and buried. He returned, stinking of ouzo and reeking of tobacco. We continued our journey, descending the mountain. On the outskirts of Delphi, the van lurched forward, stopped abruptly. The driver got out, reached our cases from amongst the dead fish in the back of the van, pitched them onto the roadside. Get out! Delphi! Oh boy, were we ever thankful to do just that. My father's mother was Norwegian, so as I had family living in Oslo and in the spirit of adventure, we decided to go to Norway. 1 week before Christmas, we were chambermaids in a Telemark hotel deep in a mountain valley. Our colleagues were village girls, ill-mannered and uncouth, rolled their own cigarettes. They treated us with such disdain and spoke not a word of English. It was Christmas morning. Pauline and I sat red-eyed with this rough bunch for breakfast at the long wooden kitchen table. Cold pickled fish, hard dry bread, porridge and disgusting yellow Norwegian gritty goat cheese. No one offered or passed us anything. We were hungry, sad, disappointed and homesick. We just wanted to go home. We commiserated and bravely soldiered on. Pauline and I cleaned 70 hotel guest rooms every morning, permanently exhausted and starving hungry. Any cigarettes or visible form of snacks found as we dusted were good pickings for our pockets. It was New Year's Eve with a party for the hotel guests, held in the large lounge with a vast log-burning crackling fire. From our quarters we could hear the music and the merriment. Eventually we fell asleep, to awake next morning, and guess who had to clean up the mess? Washrooms and all. I had never been in a male facility. I entered to be confronted by this large blank wall with a trough at the bottom. As I approached to check out how it worked, a huge wave of water came rushing down the wall, apparently the mechanism by which the trough was flushed. Me and my maid's outfit were soaked. Pauline did the ladies, and she stayed dry. Now for the enormous fireplace, full of ashes. Having little experience of cleaning fireplaces, I figured the vacuum cleaner would be a quick tool to get the job done, not realizing that there were still burning embers amongst the ashes. So as fast as I vacuumed, the embers were burning holes in the bag, blowing all the ashes out behind me. Then came the flames. We were terrified. What to do now? We spoke no Norwegian to confess our sin, and no one spoke English, except the barman. He sympathetically agreed to drive us to the station once we had made the decision to run away. With our tails between our legs, we sought refuge with my kindly relatives in Oslo, both professors at the university, who took pity on us. But when they suggested we take classes in Norwegian, we quickly found another hotel with waitress jobs and moved on. We were there for adventure, not to study. With many stories to tell, still fast friends, we returned to England, back to the nursing agency, now penniless and somewhat disillusioned with our lot in life. One day we saw an ad in a local paper recruiting English nurses as sunshine girls to work in Zambia on a 1-year contract. Good pay, good life, and sunshine all year round. What more could a girl want? But where was Zambia? All 5 flats of us got out the atlas, no Google. We found it in the middle of Africa, previously northern Rhodesia. That year, 1965, it had become independent and renamed Zambia. That same week, we were down to the Zambian embassy. 3 weeks later, we stepped off the plane in Ndola, Zambia. Dry, brown, and hot. The nurse's residence was fancy, with a pool, great accommodation, a super fun bunch of nurses, and a whirl of a social life. But the hospital, run by the government, was shocking. Africans going only there to die. Rats ran up the ivy poles, babies slept 2 and 3 in a crib, often on outdoor verandas. Doctors smoked beside oxygen tanks, and with the kitchen right beside the operating room, there were flies everywhere. All around outside were large African families camping in the surrounding barren fields with their cooking coal pots burning over wood fires. Smoke, dirt, insects, crying babies, howling dogs, and loud wailing sounds wafting through the still hot air. Then, to earn a regular wage, we joined a shelter for homeless street women. But the scene there was utterly heartbreaking, and needless to say, we didn't stay there very long. Night duty was the worst. It was a frantically busy night on my medical floor. I was the charge nurse with 2 young African assistants and over 30 very sick patients. At least 2 patients were on death's door. Around midnight, 1 young woman expired. I called the doctor to certify her as dead. "You can do that," he said. "You don't need me." And then take her to the morgue. Her heart had ceased to beat and respirations were imperceptible. She was dead for sure. Now to get her to the morgue. I will remember that night for the rest of my life. 1 assistant must help me and the other stay with the patients, I thought. Little Mary, with huge dark eyes like saucers and deeply superstitious, helped me heave the heavy, lifeless body onto the rickety gurney. Outside the door, we bumped the 3-wheel cart in the dead of night across the potholed field, through all the smoke and wailing families to a concrete shed at the end of the field. I unlocked the door with my bunch of keys, but where was the light switch? Gingerly groping my way around the wall, I got it. Switching it on revealed 4 wooden shelves. One was empty. That was where Mary and I hastily placed the body and bolted out, racing back across the field twice as fast as we had come. That was my first and last time in a morgue. 6 months after we had arrived in Zambia, we heard from Judy, our gorgeous nursing friend. Imagine that of all the possible coincidences, her husband, Richard, was being transferred from England to work in, of all places, Zambia. It was Judy who introduced me to Jeff, my future husband, who worked for the same company as Richard. Then our Sunshine 1-year contract was up. Pauline returned to England. 3 months later, Jeff and I were married in Zambia, November the 24th, 1966. Judy made my wedding dress and Richard gave me away. My mum had come for the wedding and stayed on for Christmas. Jeff and I both loved cooking and entertaining. We decided to host Christmas dinner. Judy and Richard brought a friend. My mum opened the door. There were loud exclamations, instant recognition, and hugs all round. My mum and the friend, Liz, had met each other in the Flying Fish Club, imagine, in Barbados, 9 years earlier. Liz was the same age as me. When she was 16, her mother had died. her father had remarried, so Liz had left home and crewed on a yacht across the Atlantic, landing in Barbados. There she went, of all places, to my mum's restaurant for lunch at the Flying Fish Club. Liz continued on her sailing journey, and 9 years later, in the middle of Africa, they would meet again. Liz stayed in Zambia. Judy, Liz and I became fast friends, and a year later, Liz and Ian were married with a wedding reception at our house. We all started having babies, were godparents to each other's children, and remained best friends, all living happily in Zambia. In 1968, Jeff and I went from Africa on holiday to Barbados with our 10-month-old baby. While walking along the beach past a little cottage, people on the veranda waved us to come up for a drink. It was none other than Anne and Anne, my first two best friends from school days with whom I had completely lost touch. And now, here I was, 10 years later, at 26, with a husband and a baby, living in the middle of Africa. We have never lost touch from that day to this. Jeff and I returned to Barbados on several occasions from Zambia, and now, in retirement, every year from Canada. We have all visited each other and vacationed together over the years. Our children are friends, and now even the next generation, the grandchildren, are friends. Anne and Anne are still two of my nearest and dearest friends, and will always be. Those years in Zambia were some of the happiest years of my life, with wonderful friends, adventures, experiences and memories that I will cherish forever. Having gone to Zambia for 1 year, I had lived there for 8, leaving in 1973 to emigrate to Toronto with a husband and 2 children. It was 7 years after arriving in Canada that through mutual friends we met Christine, my friend from school days in Barbados, now living here in Toronto. Christine had left Barbados 2 years after me, eventually living in New Zealand with her husband Steve and 4 children, and emigrating to Toronto in 1980. All this unbeknownst to me. I had not seen Christine for 22 years when I first left Barbados at 16. So much water had flowed under our bridges. That was 38 years ago, and today Chris and Steve are 2 of our closest friends living here in the city. It was in 1989 that Jeff and I went from Toronto to England to visit friends. The one person we could not find was Jill. On our journey home, while at Gatwick Airport, I got a phone number from Direct Inquiries. A little niece who answered told me that Auntie Jill was living in Canada. Back in Canada on my 48th birthday, I called Jill, living in Cambridge, Ontario. When I told her that it was Wendy, you could have heard the screams from Cambridge to Toronto. We met the next week. Neither of us came up for air until we had shared our stories. She had married, subsequently divorced, and was now remarried. She had been to Barbados on several occasions with her husband Stuart, searching for me, but eventually had given up. It had been 30 years since Jill and I had parted, and we have not parted since. In the meantime, Jill has been widowed, and we were happy to attend her 3rd marriage to David. Next year will be 30 years since Jill and I found each other again. Now, both grandmothers, we still visit each other, have holidayed together in Barbados where Jill met the 2 Annes. We will forever be friends. Pauline and Judy both live in England. Jeff and I have visited them there on many occasions. 6 years ago, Jeff and I from Canada Pauline and her husband Peter from England, and Liz, now living in Australia, all travelled to England and were there together to celebrate Judy's 70th birthday. What a celebration that was! All of us, 70-year-old grandmothers, partying together. Pauline and Peter have been to visit us here in Canada. Always such fun and much laughter and reminiscing about all our past adventures together. Last year we all four met and vacationed together in beautiful Barbados, about which they had heard so much. Of course, they met the two Annes. Later we went with them to the Greek islands. Despite the fact that Pauline had a broken Achilles tendon, was in a knee-high cast and crutches, and I was on large doses of steroids for an autoimmune disease, we said nothing would stop us, even if we had to crawl. As for Liz in Australia, she and Ian have visited us here many times in Canada, and we have been all the way to Australia to see them too. In 2014, we all met in South Africa and spent 2 wonderful weeks together. Yes, we do literally go to the ends of the earth to see each other. The serendipitous meetings, the connections, and the miraculous reconnections have woven the threads of friendship through the fabric of my life.